gotta go to do real work. They're missing out on all the fun. Today's gonna be a fun day. I recognize a number of y'all who were our pioneers with the white wine making experience. Who was here for that? A lot of y'all. So we had a lot of fun, and we learned a few things. The Earthkind Vineyard out here is really special, not only I know to the Dallas County Master Gardeners, but also to me. My name is Michael Cook. I am your viticulture program specialist with Extension. So viticulture is the study of grape growing, and what y'all are participating in today is enology, which is the winemaking side of things. And so I work primarily with our commercial grape growers across the 55 counties of North Texas, about 120 of them. And then my secondary responsibility is supporting the Master Gardeners and the public with education. And Sherry and some of the founding members here, y'all are one of the few Master Gardener organizations that A, has an Earthkind research trial. There's only about 5 or 6 across the whole state. And B, who y'all are the most active as far as actually growing the grapes and making something with them. The jelly, and you may do some juice, I don't know, and then the wine. You're the only Master Gardener group that has successfully made wine as a Master Gardener group with the Earthkind grape varieties. In fact, y'all are probably one of the first that's ever made wine out of varieties like Miss Blanc and Lake Emerald in the state of Texas. So that's really exciting. The most exciting part was, I don't know, when was this? 3-4 months ago maybe, or maybe sooner. No, it was in spring, maybe 3 months, 4 months. I was invited to taste test the wine from the Miss Blanc and the Lake Emerald, the 2 white wines we made last year. And number one, they were really nice, especially for the first time making wine. And I'm an Aggie, so I always like to, make things interesting and make mistakes with everyone. So we had a couple, points during the winemaking process, or times during the winemaking process, where we had some oopsie moments. And so the fact that we were able to make in one try, number one, drinkable wine, and wine that wasn't spoiled, or none of us died after drinking it, but also white wine is really hard to make. And to make a white wine that's actually drinkable and pleasant was really nice. Now there were 2 things and one thing, if you noticed, if you have any of that wine left, you may have noticed some sediment floating around in the bottle, and we did not filter that, and which is okay, you can drink it, but this time moving forward for both the red wines and the whites, we are going to be using a filtration system, so that shouldn't be a problem. The second thing we learned is that those white wines, the cool thing is they tended to hold their tartness or acidity very well, which is a big challenge in Texas because it's so dang hot. Grapes typically, as they ripen, in the summer, the sugar content goes up and the acid content goes down. And if the acid content is too low, then a wine literally will taste like water. It won't have that crisp, refreshing taste. And the cool thing was, is those varieties naturally, we didn't add any acid to it. They naturally held their tartness, which is really nice. But they were a little too tart, I thought, and so we could add a little bit of sugar, not a lot, just to round that out. So the cool thing was, in just one attempt, with these varieties I've never made wine with y'all's help, the dedication of the team, we made really nice wine, and we can improve that even more if y'all decide to do that. Yes?
Got a quick question. So last year we just froze the green grapes whole.
Mm-hmm.
So this year our intention was to, when they come off, wash them, clean them, press them, and just save the juice.
Yes. So we were talking about that. So for those of you who are new, or maybe you need a refresher, I always do every year. There's the 2 main different ways of making wine. Is you make red wines a certain way, and those are from red grapes. Okay. You can add some white grapes to those if you want to add certain profiles, but a red wine, the color comes from the skin of red grapes. That's for 99% of the time, that's the case. And then there's a different method for making white wines, which can either come from red grapes or can come from white grapes. Now we had those 2 white grape varieties, Miss Blanc and Lake Emerald, which y'all grow out there in the Earthkind Vineyard. Now, white wine, the reason why it's clear, more clear, or just lightly gold or green, hay, straw color, is because as soon as we harvest, we want to get the pulp and the juice away from the skins and the seeds, because the skins and the seeds contribute nothing good to white grapes and white wine. Total opposite is true for making red wine. Again, all the color in 99% of grapes is in the skin only. And the tannins, when someone says, you know, what kind of red wine do you like, dry or sweet? The dry wines, number one, are fermented to have no residual sugar, or very low. But also that dryness, when you drink red wine and your cheeks kind of dry out and you go, that sometimes it tastes like bark or something, you know, in your mouth. That's from the tannins, similarly to what's found in things like persimmons. So that those tannins are actually blocking your receptors here. They're binding to saliva, and it actually gives you that dry sensation. And that's really nice in most red wines. But the tannins are also found in the skins. And so we need skin contact to be able to extract that in red grapes, okay? But in whites, we don't. That tends to lead to wines that are orange in color, which is actually becoming kind of a little niche cult type following. Some people like that, but it tends to bring bitterness into the wine from those skins, which is never a good thing. So anyway, I'm gonna walk y'all through. This is not a formal presentation. This is literally a how-to. And so some of y'all are familiar with the process. You'll see a lot of similarities from what we did last year, but we're gonna do one main step differently. And that is, instead of harvesting, crushing, and then pressing the juice off of the skins and seeds and pulp, we are going to actually take the fruit, put it in our fancy crushing machine, and then we are gonna ferment the wine in this soup we call must that has the skins and the pulp and the seeds. And so, because again, we want to extract all the goodies out of the skin, and so that's the main difference. But to go back, I went down a rabbit hole there. But with the white fruit, or the white grapes, you can do a couple things. If you're not going to be able to process and make wine immediately after harvest, which none of us usually do because you're exhausted after harvesting, and the winemaking process takes a good, 3-4 hours. You can do a couple things. Now, what you did initially is you just froze the berries whole, right? And that actually can be a really good thing, especially though with the red grapes, because that freezes all the cells, and then just like in our plants, when we get, winter storm fury or a spring frost, the tissue, the cells, as they thaw out, rupture. But the cool thing with red grapes is that actually increases extraction of color and tannins, which can be, to a degree, good. But in white grapes, that's not as beneficial. So to answer your question, the ideal situation, if you cannot process that fruit immediately, is to juice it essentially and freeze it. Now, if that's still a lot of work, then the second best thing is literally just to take that fruit, crush it, or keep it whole, and then just freeze it. And then just you're gonna get a little bit of extraction. You might get a little oxidation. If you recall, that fruit was overall green, but there was some kind of brown coloration on the skins because oxidation was already starting. Not the end of the world, but that can contribute some kind of off flavors to wine. So ideally though, we would remove those skins from the pulp and the juice as quickly as possible with white grapes, right? So if y'all are doing this at home, or if you're gonna be working with the Master Gardener group and producing this wine year after year and teaching, you're gonna see some similarities to last time, and you'll see some differences. And there's always the ideal way of doing things, and then because we're not at home where we can do everything, every day and check on things, there's the practical way. So the end goal is to brew something we can drink and no one dies from, right? Especially if you're gonna be giving these to your friends. So, the cool thing about wine is You know, this was the preferred drink way back when, even over water, because there was no way to chlorinate water or sterile filter it. And so wine, because of alcohol, acidity, and low pH, it was the safest thing to drink. And so if we take a couple steps to be safe today, similar to if you're canning or preserving food, then we are gonna produce a beverage that's very safe. And so that's good. So let's get started. This is informal. We're gonna be just doing how-to stuff. I'm gonna walk you through the early steps, and everything we're gonna do today is hands-on. So don't be afraid to, push and shove gently and, get active. You can, if you don't want to, you can sit in the back and just listen, but I think everyone here wants to, do hands-on. So the first thing, and it was funny because someone was talking about it earlier, and it's the gospel truth here, is when we are making wine, we are literally taking the mindset of a surgeon. Cleanliness is next to godliness here. Just think of it, we are taking juice with sugar in it, and we are, have lots of tools. We have our hands, we're cleaning things with, we're picking grapes and moving them around, when we're moving the equipment and in the buckets, and we're introducing organisms, right? Bacteria, yeast, fungus. There's native yeasts and there's bacteria on the fruit themselves. And so any of those microorganisms will happily eat that sugar. And most of the time, they are having a great time in that sugar soup that we're making, and they will ruin that wine very quickly, whether that's acetic acid producing bacteria or turning wine into vinegar, right? Whether that's some sort of native yeast that starts to make alcohol, and then it produces these off aromas that make the wine smell terrible. There's lots of things that can go wrong because you have the perfect media for living organisms to want to grow in and poop in and release things in. I'm trying to make it light here. So, there's lots of things going on. And so we are essentially trying to create an environment that is like a hospital operating room. Everything we touch is going to be sanitized, not just cleaned. Okay, cleaning is when you just remove, soap, scum, and debris and dirt. And it might wash off some microorganisms, but it's not gonna kill them. So there's usually some remaining. We have to have a sterile environment. So when we're out there playing around and making red wine, we don't wanna, dunk our hand in the bucket because our hands are full of microorganisms. Anytime we touch that must, which is the juice, skins, and seeds soup mix, okay? Anything that goes into that, whether it's a spoon or a stir or a hydrometer measuring device or whatever, has to be sterile, right? Because if we introduce bacteria quick, fast, and in a hurry, it's going to ruin that wine. And so the great thing is y'all have done it before. Last time we had no wine faults, no off aromas, no vinegar. And white wines are really hard to make. Red wine's even easier because a red wine is full of antioxidants. And so it tends to oxidize much less. And so that's exciting. So anyway, so cleanliness. So what do we use to clean? Well, there's a number of things we can use as a cleaning agent on dirty equipment, and then there are different sanitizing agents. The most common is gonna be sulfite. So some of y'all are very familiar with sulfites. The two most common are gonna be potassium metabisulfite, which are here in these little pill forms, and then sodium metabisulfite. You can use either one. And essentially sulfites do a really good job of killing everything that's living. And we'll get to the reason why this can be a problem later. But another thing you can use to sanitize, I saw Star San in there. Another common sanitizing agent is iodine. And so you can use iodine. You can go get this at a winemaking brew shop, okay? Now since we're gonna be using potassium or sodium metabisulfite anyways, we're just gonna use that. So our first step is we're gonna go outside, we're gonna take anything that's gonna touch this must, and we're gonna sanitize it in these pails. The pails themselves, those are gonna be our fermenters. We're also gonna sanitize the crusher destemmer machine. We're gonna sanitize all our tools and measuring devices, okay? And so we're gonna walk out there. One thing I'll tell you is I will be dosing this out. If you are to do this at home, this is an excellent product. It's not expensive. However, it is labeled as danger. And the reason it's labeled as danger as opposed to like caution or warning is because it is very, it's not as, maybe it's caustic, but the main thing is it's an inhalation hazard. So I will tell you, if anyone has asthma, I would recommend you skip this part of sanitizing, because when I open this, it's very strong smelling, and that can aggravate some people. And so I'll dose it out and stir it, but we have to be very careful when we are mixing this and sanitizing that. Number one, we don't breathe in the fumes. Number two, we don't splash it on ourselves. If we do, we just rinse it off. We don't want to get it in our eyeballs, right? So this is the most sensitive part of the whole process is using this product. Again, it's very safe as far as, toxicity, but it can, irritate lungs, and it can burn skin, slightly. So we want to be very careful with this since we're using concentrated product. Okay, we're going to do that first. We're going to wait a couple minutes, and we're going to set up the crusher destemmer. And what that's going to do is that is going to, mainly in this case, just lightly crush our fruit. Now, at home, you could get a rolling pin and bash the heck out of those fruit and have release that pent-up anger from dealing with the birds and the insects out in your vineyard, right? But we have a nice machine here that's going to do it really fast and efficiently. If you wanted to later, let's say you have a couple grapes in the backyard and you don't want to bash, with some sort of, heavy item, then you can get fairly inexpensively crushers on Amazon that are hand crank for, $100 or so. But we're going to do that. We're going to fill up our pails as much as we can, and we're going to bring everything inside. And then we're going to start the fermentation process, okay? So you'll get to see, from start to fermentation today, that whole process. Then, if everything goes correctly, in about, Friday, we'll be back again, and we're gonna hopefully see fermentation finishing, and then we're going to press off the juice from that must. And then that will be wine, and we're gonna age that, okay, for a few months at least. So, anywho, so those are that's kind of the outline for today. It's just real informal. Get dirty. If you are going to be handling anything that you don't want to touch, then we've got gloves here. Or if you don't want to get super sticky, that's okay too. But this is something I'll be handling. But if anyone is moving buckets, again, it's okay if you're just holding it, but don't put your head in the bucket and breathe in. Okay? It's not going to be pleasant. It's not going to kill you, but it could get your lungs a little irritated. So. So let's go, excuse me, outside. All right, so what I'm gonna do is we're gonna put a couple tablespoons in each one, all right? And we'll stir it up. Now the interesting thing about potassium or sodium metabisulfite as a sanitizing agent is when it's in solution, the reason why it's so irritating to our lungs is it becomes a gas. And that gas is actually what does most of the sterilizing. So when you mix up the liquid itself is not nearly as effective as a sterilant. So we want to have some headspace in our buckets here because the gas is what really kills the microbes like the bacteria and the yeast and the fungi. Okay, so we're gonna stir these up and let them sit for a little while, and then we'll keep one of these for now as our sterilizing bucket. So if I, am stirring up some stuff and then I set this and I need it again, I'll dip it real quick and then dip it in. Because anytime this is out of solution, we've got spores floating around, people are handling it, and naturally we're gonna get contamination. So we're gonna treat this like an operating room. So we'll stir this a little bit. And then the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna start crushing this fruit. And I'm gonna need someone who's strong to help me set this machine up. Now, if someone will just put the lids on these loosely, just put the lid over it, that'll help keep that gas in there. Okay, so you just lay it on there on the top. And if I can get someone strong, well, with two of us, it should be good.
If you were using iodine, how much would you use?
So that's a great question. The iodine label is, we want about 100 parts per million, so that's 2 ounces per, I think 5 gallons of water. So not that much. We're not using a ton, but it's more than the potassium metabisulfite. So what we're going to do is, this is our handles, and we're going to set it on these salt ones here. And let me see here. Plug that in, please. We'll take this. What we're going to do is everyone's going to get a chance. I want everyone to take one bag, and if we have extras, you can do more, but we're all going to, participate in crushing. And y'all can come take a bag and come over this way. Now I'm hoping I pick this up. Yes, I'm praying it works. If not, we're going to have to beat these grapes. Yes, we need to sanitize this first. So I'll come around and get a pail, but everyone grab a bag and kind of stand over here so you can see what's going on. Let me turn it on and see if it works.
I'm taking 2 bags.
These are all Muscadines, but
So I'm not as concerned about sanitizing, but it's been sitting. There's dust. Y'all know, even on dust and things, there's living organisms. So we're gonna sterilize this. Now what's cool about this machine is, again, it's called a crusher destemmer. And you put the fruit in the hopper here, and there are a series of plastic rollers. You can see if you want to look. And those rollers are what crushes the fruit. And then it forces the crushed fruit and the cluster stems, if you have them, into this bottom compartment. And you can see these paddles and these series of holes, perforations, that forces the crushed berries through those holes, and then the green stems eject out of the side. So we're able to remove all the cluster. So the juice is going to come from below. Okay. Yeah. So we're going to need, if we can get, one thing we may do. Yeah. Let me see. Because I didn't think about that. The best thing to do is we can take one of these carts and sanitize it, and then use that just to hold it until we can dump it off.
The juice?
There's a chute here, and I forgot all about it.
Oh, I was going to say we could use the bucket.
But yeah, so the juice, actually it's more than juice, the must is going to come from the bottom. Okay, so we're going to put our pails, actually we're going to use one of these carts rather, and sanitize it. And that's what's going to catch our must. Yeah, you can move these carts, we can bring these carts over here, I guess, and this here is just a cover. So I just took it off to show y'all. And when I sanitize, we want to get good coverage in here. But we will slide this over so we don't have stuff sitting all over the place. It's just a cover. Alright, so while we're doing this, I want everyone to stand back because I'm going to be slinging this sanitizer.
Don't want to get slow. So we started freezing them. The jelly tuna is used from that. No, about 4 years ago.
What's happening?
But if you made jelly, you might be able, like if you had bread and you
can do it,
we'll lift you up. To kind of augment the other stuff.
This is frozen bread.
So I think this is kind of an outdoor
How many of y'all had flashbacks to your college days when y'all were making sangria out of a trash can? This kind of looks like the same thing. So this is it, guys. So this is what we call our must. And the must is simply the soup filled with the pulp, the skin, the seeds, juice. And so with red grapes, because we want the color, you'll notice the colors in the skin. The pulp is clear, right? And so we need to get the color out of here. So we could actually make a white wine right now if we immediately took the juice out of here and left the skins and seeds. But we're not going to do that because we want the color, right? So this is now must, and it's not wine yet. So what I need to do is we need to fill the 5-gallon buckets. Those are going to be our fermentation devices. And so we have one here. Now, if you want, you can get a cup inside and taste some juice. This is perfectly, fine to drink. If you want to, you can smell it. You can smell that muscadine, that classic muscadine aroma. Now, here's the deal, guys. This is real important. We're gonna get a cup, and we're gonna, if you have a pitcher, and we're gonna get everything, the skins, the seeds, the juice, and we're only gonna fill, the key point here is no more than 3/4 full. Because as we ferment, gas is gonna be rising, CO2, and we don't want these to overflow into a nice building. So 3/4, we probably will have some leftover. I would say we can either find more pails, or if you want to Ziploc the rest and freeze it, and you can make wine another time from that. It's up to you, right? We may have some extra, so we'll see. But that's what we're gonna do now. So yeah, so let's dump all those out.
But don't we have more?
Well, I cleaned them, but they've been used again. So, like, they were used to transport.
For those of y'all that can hear, great question. The question was, how much fruit does it take to make a bottle of wine? So generally, it takes about 15 pounds to 20 pounds, depending on the size of fruit, to make a gallon. And a gallon, now if you're like me, I like to sample frequently. So a gallon will make at least 4 bottles of wine, but up to 5. So that's a gallon of juice. But we've got this here. So we're looking at probably this 5-gallon bucket should make at least a gallon and a half, which is about 5, 6, 7 bottles. Yeah, maybe a little more, it just depends. But on a vine basis, we're looking at about a gallon of wine every 2 vines to 3 vines, depending on the crop. So that's, you know, okay. Yeah, sure, good question. Okay, so these guys are ready. All right, so yes, those are perfect. So we've got a couple more pails coming. If y'all want to go ahead, if you want to take control of one of these pails and take it inside and get it out of the heat, and then you can come back out. But we're almost done. Yes, big deal. Most people have no clue what actually goes into this process when you're drinking your Boda Box wine. We call it MOG, or material other than grapes. When they're mechanically harvesting in California, where I studied, there's birds going in there, there's nests, there's snakes, and so that's one of the reasons why, you know, most people don't want to know what's in their wine. So a fly here or there, no big deal. We're going to sanitize everything, filter it out. So anyways, okay, so we're ready for the last 2. You can dump those out.
Ready, Abby? Is that one ready? Should we dump it out?
Yes. Good.
Y'all need the water on, or did you have water?
No, we're good.
Usually, if you get a little splash, it just
Yeah. Well, you don't have to dump it. It's gonna get. Yeah, it's too heavy. Here you
no,
go.
yeah, you might see a little red.
Why don't we bring it around and put it back? Okay, son, do this. I'm gonna move the hose. So. No mind.
No, must, M-U-S-T. Yeah. If we get musk in here, we're in big trouble. We don't want musk. But yeah, must, M-U-S-T. That is the crushed soup of juice, pulp, skin, seeds. Okay? So, the next step is someone asked a great question. They said, well, we're sanitizing all this stuff, but the grapes aren't sanitized. They're natural. If you look out in the vineyard and you were to look at the berry, a lot of times you can see this kind of white haze over the berry. And if you rub on it, you might see, you know, that your actual imprint of your finger. That's called the bloom. It's the waxy, essentially cuticle of the berry that helps it from drying out. And that bloom naturally has lots of living microorganisms, yeast, bacteria. And so we do our part to keep the bacteria and living organisms off, out of the wine or the must from our hands and tools, but there's still a ton that came in with the fruit. And so cleanliness is next to godliness. And so the next step of the process is we need to add that potassium metabisulfite, that sterilant, to the fruit, but in much less concentration. It's going to be just enough to kill off any of the major microorganisms in here. Now you go, why would we do that? Because we're going to add a microorganism in just a little bit, our wine yeast. And if I add my wine yeast to this and there's sulfites in there, is it going to kill them? And the answer is no. Unless we add a lot of sulfites, this yeast, wine yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, has been bred to tolerate low levels of sulfites. Now there's natural sulfites in all grapes. So there's no such thing as a sulfite-free grape or wine, okay? So we're talking low. Even when we add sulfites, we're looking at anywhere from 50 to 100 parts per million of sulfite in a finished wine. Okay, that's very low. And someone brought up a good point. This is kind of, I think, really fascinating. People hear all the time, they go up, and maybe they experience it themselves. They go, well, when I drink red wine, I get a massive headache, and I hate it. And a lot of people are very quick to say, oh, that's the sulfites. Sulfites are a chemical, and they're terrible, right? And if you have a true sulfur sensitivity, that can be a debilitating and very frustrating thing. You drink red wine and you get a headache. That's very, very rare. So people who have a true sulfur allergy that actually get a headache from the sulfites in wine, it's extremely rare. What most people are experiencing when they drink wine and they get a headache, especially red wine, is not sulfites, it's histamines. So just like when you go out and mow your yard and you don't wear your mask and you get all clogged up and it's nasty, right? You have histamine production. Same thing happens in red wine. In white wine, histamines are much less of an issue, the concentration and that type of thing. So you go, well, how do I know if it's histamines or I actually have a true sulfur allergy? Well, remember I mentioned that wine, we're looking at up to 100 parts per million of sulfite. You want to know if you're sensitive to sulfites? Go ahead and get a bag of dried apricots from the store. Dried apricots have the highest concentration, one of the highest concentrations of sulfites in any food product. Most of the dried apricots, the ones that have sulfites added, the ones that are beautiful orange, if you ever go to Trader Joe's, they usually sell the regular dried apricots that are gorgeous, they're beautiful, bright orange, and then you see the ones that look like your dog, had an accident, right? They're brown and they're not the same texture, they're kind of more mushy. Those are the sulfite-free ones. Those have oxidized, right? And so the ones that are bright orange have been treated with sulfite to keep that color and texture beautiful. Now, dried apricots that are treated with sulfites tend to have 3,000 parts per million of sulfite. So if you eat dried apricots, the ones that are treated with sulfites, and you don't react or get a headache from it, then it's not the sulfites in the wine, it's the histamines. So what can you do? Well, you could drink white wine, you could try to take an antihistamine before drinking red wine and see if that helps. Those are your options there. But that's the most common, what we're realizing, the most common reason for getting a headache after drinking, especially white wine. Now, some people are sensitive to also ethanol, which is alcohol, and that's what's found in wine here. That's what we're going to be making a lot of. Yes, go ahead.
So what is the additive that the California wines are adding to their wines that, say, New Zealand or other countries is not adding?
So the most common form of sulfites is going to be this sodium or potassium metabisulfite. That's the chemical active ingredient. And so if you see a label that says not treated with sulfites or sulfite, low in sulfites, they literally will allow the natural sulfites in the fruit to remain, but they're not going to add, or they will minimally add the potassium or sodium metabisulfite. To my knowledge, there's no other product that is used for that purpose. I could be wrong, but yeah. So usually you're dealing with the natural levels. Now that's very hard to do in environments where we have unregulated conditions. And so when we're dealing with hobby level equipment, it would be almost impossible to utilize or make a wine that's no sulfites added. Okay. So what we're doing today is we're utilizing sulfites to our advantage, but we're doing so in a very controlled way and in a way that the levels would be similar to any red wine you would get at the store, right? Very low, but yeah, but if you do see, there's a new trend, right? Pesticide free or low in pesticides, low in sulfites. If that's what you want, that's fine. We cannot do that on a hobby scale. There's too many variables and risk for that because we're dealing with, even though we like to think we're treating this like an OR or an operating room, it's still far from that, right? And so, the air is loaded right now. So what I did, that's a great question. So what I did is because we have, sterile tools and buckets, but our fruit is not sterile. I added one, we call these Camden tablets, and all it is, it's the same thing, but in a pill form, so it's easy, we don't have to measure out anything. So Camden tablets, this is potassium metabisulfite. This is the protecting agent that is going to kill off any of these bad microorganisms like a bacteria, yeast, and fungi that were natively found in the fruit, or even introduced by accident, with our hands or that kind of thing. So we use very little, and that's gonna help clean that up. Okay, so that's doing its thing right now. I'm gonna go ahead and actually push these little tablets. The nice thing is 1 tablet per 5 gallons of must. So that's all you need, a very small amount. And I'm gonna push that in there just a little bit, just to get contact with some moisture. Remember, as that's gassing off, that's what's actually doing most of the sterilization. So we're gonna put the lid back on, put that tablet in the juice so it can start dissolving. Okay, it smells really good. The fruit looks great, it's not oxidized, it smells really nice, so it's good fruit. It's not rotting or putting any off aromas. It smells really fresh and clean.
Don't forget that one.
So we'll put this back. Okay.
Don't forget the one on the floor.
That one, thank you. Good eye. Forgot about this. So let's do the math. I'm an Aggie, so I'll let you do the math. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 5 5-gallon pails. I would anticipate we'll probably get about, it depends, but probably 1.5 gallons for each one. So how many gallons is that? 1.5 gallons times 5. 7.5 gallons. We'll be conservative. We'll say 4 bottles because we're all going to be sampling during the process. So how many bottles is that? So around 30 bottles, at least, I would say. That's conservative. Okay. Legality-wise, if you want to make wine at home, you, I won't say what age I started making wine at home, but let's say it was on the border, a couple years below the border. But legally, anyone at home who's of age 21 or older can make up to 200 gallons of wine, okay, legally. And so that's a lot. That's a lot. 200 times 5, that's 1,000 bottles of wine. If you were to make more of that, it's illegal, right? And the other thing is you can make 200 gallons, but you cannot sell it unless you have a permit. And the permit to have is a G permit, and if you get a G permit, you are a winery. And then not only is the state interested, the federal government is interested. The TABC, the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission, is our state alcohol organization. Every single winery you go to has to be permitted by the state. And also, formerly the ATF, the TTB now, is the federal regulator. And so they have their own requirements too. Now, why does the government care about alcohol? Well, that's it. That's tax. That is huge tax money. Every winery has to become a bonded winery in the state of Texas, which means if a tornado blew through and destroyed all the wine, they have insurance on that. And the government literally, the wineries have to submit every so often the exact inventory of what they have in their bonded area, of number of wine bottles, and what they've sold, because the government taxes every single gallon of wine. And so they're very strict on that. So, it's mainly tax money. But again, at home, 200 gallons, tax-free, you just can't sell it. So you can give it away, you can do tastings, but you cannot charge anything or exchange anything technically for that. Okay? So we're letting the Camden tablets do their thing. Now we can start prepping, and we'll kind of do some hands-on in a little bit. We're gonna start doing some chemistry here. There's 2 things we need to measure, okay? So now we're kind of in a lab setting. We need to measure the sugar content of this must. And the reason we need to do that is because we need to understand that we are eventually gonna have alcohol, right? And we need to kind of get an idea of what our projected alcohol level should be. Now, if we have a base sugar measurement, we measure the sugar in either two ways. One is the total soluble solids as a percentage. So we'd say, we'd measure this and it would be 20% sugar. So 20% of this juice is a soluble solid. Most of that is going to be sugar. So we'd say the sugar content is 20%. Now in the wine industry, we use the same machine to measure, but it's in a different unit, and that's called degree Brix, B-R-I-X. It's the exact same thing. So if I take my refractometer, which is how we measure, one of the ways we measure sugar, or the total soluble solids in this juice, it'll have a reading, and it'll be in Brix, but it's the exact same as percent total soluble solid.
And what was that called again?
This is called a refractometer, and what it does is you would put the juice here, there's a prism, you hold it up to the sun, and through the principle of refraction, it will tell you how many soluble solids there are, i.e. how much sugar. There's a little scale, y'all can all practice with this. This is like 20 bucks on Amazon. Some people use this measuring their vegetables, like tomatoes. You can use this for anything with sugar in it. So you want to know what the sugar is on your peaches, your tomatoes, your grapes, you can use that, yes.
You're using that, you're saying soluble solids, and only sugars are gonna be the soluble solids?
No, but the majority of the soluble solids, there'll be proteins and things like that, but most are sugars, whether
That you can see.
polysaccharides or monosaccharides, yes, they're mainly sugar constituents. Yeah, so there's a slight error, but the majority are sugar. So this is the closest we can get to actually measuring sugar on a small scale. You know, if you are Gallo Winery, they're gonna have major implementation and lab grade, tools to measure that. But, this gets us in the ballpark. Now, why do we care? The reason we care is because we want to make sure there's enough food for the yeast, i.e. enough sugar. That's what the yeast are eating, right? They're not eating alcohol. They're eating sugar. That's their energy source. Like when I go to Shipley's Donuts, I'm eating the sugar and the fat, but that's what I'm interested in. Okay, so the yeast, they want the sugar. They eat that. They have a good time. They are releasing as byproducts two things. What are those two components? Say that again. They're carbon dioxide. They need oxygen, and they are releasing, I'm sure, a little bit, but it's mainly their byproducts. They're essentially pooping out alcohol in the form of ethanol, and then carbon dioxide. So if you ever make bread at home, it's the same process, except there's no alcohol. The bread yeast are very similar to wine yeast, but bread yeast, their byproducts are CO2. So they eat the sugars, they poop out CO2. That's why there's those little holes in your bread. That's the CO2 gas from the yeast, primarily, but they're not producing alcohol. But wine yeast will produce as byproducts both alcohol and carbon dioxide. And as the yeast are eating those sugars, they're pooping out, and I say that, loosely, but they're excreting, their byproducts are alcohol and carbon dioxide. And so that sugar content is going down, and the alcohol content is going up. Now, so what that means is we can make a correlation between the sugar level and our final alcohol level, roughly. And the rule of thumb is if this juice measures 20% sugar, my final alcohol content will be somewhere around 10%. So you take that sugar content and have it, and that is going to be your potential alcohol by volume. Now, yeah, go ahead.
Do you measure the sugar at the end again to tell you have the
Great
alcohol,
question.
or?
We're going to take the sugar reading initially because this is going to give us an idea of how much sugar we may have to add additionally if our fruit isn't fully ripe or doesn't have the sugar content we want. After that, we're going to use a different device. It's called the hydrometer, and that's going to tell us when the wine is finished. Great question. We'll get to that in a second. So I want to take a sugar reading so I know, what my alcohol content will be, and if there's not enough sugar, we're going to add some. It's called chapitalization, and many wineries will do that. Now, unfortunately, the grapes we have here are excellent grapes. They grow really well, but the unfortunate thing is they tend to don't produce enough sugar to make a medium to higher alcohol wine. So if you go to the grocery store and you get a white wine, most white wines are around 10, 12, 13% alcohol. And that makes a nice, well-rounded wine. Red wines typically 12 to 14%. So if my sugar content is 20, then I would only get up to 10% alcohol. And that 2, 3, 4% doesn't seem like a big difference, but it's huge. So if I didn't add sugar, give more food for the yeast to make more alcohol, the wine here would be very, very light, and it may be flabby. It may taste more like water and not as much like wine. The same thing's true with the acid. So that being said, what we're gonna do.
Can I ask one more question?
Go ahead, of course.
Is there a rule of thumb of how many, a cup of sugar raises your bricks, your?
Yes. So there's a calculation for that. Now, one thing we can do is simply add sugar and just keep measuring to see it bump up. But yeah, there's a calculation for that. I forget what it is off the top of my head. I'm gonna have to Google it, but anywho. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a spoon here, and y'all can come up too and take a look at this. I'm gonna give this a little stir. All right, we're gonna take our must, and now do not drink it because we've got the sulfites in it. We're gonna pour this to the point of runoff on this little glass here, this window. Okay, try not to get any actual pulp pieces, just the juice. Shut the little gate flap here. All right, we're gonna put our eye up here. Oh, good. And we're gonna put it to the light. And you'll notice the scale on the left is bricks. And so that's what we're looking at. So y'all can take this and put it up to your eye, put it up to the light, and you can see where the level is. The blue level meets the white or the clear. Oh. That's at the level. So what do y'all see it as reading? Bricks.
10 bricks.
Yep. Ooh. All right, so y'all can pass that around. So the sugar content here is 10 degrees bricks, also known as 10% soluble solids. What that means is that if I pitch this yeast, my alcohol will probably be 5%, which is not much. So we're gonna have to add some sugar to give more food for the yeast so that our alcohol content is good. How are you doing?
So sugar helps.
Come on, sugar helps. Yeah, we need it. So anyways, we just crushed and destemmed our red wine.
I know
and,
it.
Yeah, come on. So we're now. We see that our sugar content is at 10%. We'd like it to be around 20% at least. That'll give us maybe even more, so maybe 12% more. If you go out to the vineyard and you have European grapes, most of those we'd like to pick at 23, 24 degrees bricks. Now, these are hybrids, so they ripen beautifully, they make delicious wine, but they just don't produce as much sugar. So we're gonna have to add a little bit just so the yeast can make more alcohol, okay? And so the conversion is we need about 3.5 cups of sugar for every pail to bring the bricks from 10 to about 21 or so. 3.5 cups.
To go from 10 to 21.
So if someone wants to help me measure out 3.5 cups, and you can dump it right in each pail, that's gonna get us enough sugar for our yeast to make the alcohol we want, so our wine actually tastes like wine and not. 3.5 cups per pail. That's gonna take us from the 10% sugar level to about 21%, which means that our alcohol level when we're done should be around 11-12%, which is a nice light medium wine. It's not gonna be real heavy, which we don't want for Muscadine. If you make a Muscadine wine that's has high alcohol, you're gonna taste it and it's gonna burn. It's gonna be like, moonshine or something. Not that I've ever had it, but it's gonna burn. So we don't want that. We want a nice, well-balanced, easy drinking wine. Yep, just pour it right in. So 3.5 cups.
Oh, wow. So Michael, I got a question. So we have
Oh yeah.
So it does water bricks, and then we didn't know what water.
I'll say that one more time.
So it told us the water and the bricks, and there was a third one.
Oh, last time?
No, in our heat.
Okay, yeah, and it depends on the refractometer, so
It
some
said
refractometers only.
BE and 20 degrees.
Yeah, so one is warped, one is for beer. So that's probably what it is. That refractometer gives you two. It gives you the bricks level, which is what we're using, and then it has another scale for the whatever warped, and that's for beer making. That's the sugar content for the grains, which will be a different scale.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay, yeah, and we can do it later if you want. I mean, if you want to add the sugar tomorrow, you can do that too. Okay, because we're gonna start fermenting, but it's gonna take the yeast at least a day to just get through the 10% sugar we have. Yeah, just pour that into the ones we don't do today. No big deal. Okay?
What determines its, they were talking about the mouth feel?
Yeah. So there's a number of factors. Yeah. Yes. Great question. So there was a good question for those that can hear me, and that is, what's this term mouthfeel with wine? You go to a restaurant or you go to a wine festival outside, and you're drinking wine, and some wines just have a different taste and a different mouthfeel. That term mouthfeel is going to explain some of those sensations other than the flavor and the smell. And so, for example, if you drink a wine and it just is real weighty, it's real viscous, it tastes thicker, that's alcohol. So the alcohol imparts the body to the wine, this kind of viscous, kind of well-rounded feeling. And so typically a wine that has more alcohol will have more of that weight. It won't have that feeling of just kind of liquid water. It'll be heavier. Okay, that's alcohol. Now the other part can yes. Now usually sugar also, if it's a sweet wine, will have even more viscosity because sugar also contributes to that weightiness. Okay. Now another component of mouthfeel is going to be that crisp tart taste. That's acid. So the acid level of a wine, typically white wines, that malic acid, tartaric acid is very well expressed because that's its major component is acid. So when you're drinking wine that's crisp and refreshing, that's due to the acid. Okay, and a red wine acid's important too. If the red wine just tastes like water, there's no bite to it, no tartness, then that's also acid. Red wines need acid as well, or it's going to taste real good.
Right, we just need to make sure we know what we've done.
He's done those two. Okay, so, and you did 2 out of 1 4-pound?
That's a great question. Yes, which I love. So Old Vine Zen, the Old Vine doesn't really have anything to do with mouthfeel because as long as you get to a certain percent sugar and we can quantify this, you get to the acid level you want, then you go into the winery and you adjust how you make the wine, and you can, essentially it's like a recipe. So an Old Vine Zen tends to produce grapes that are very fruit forward, very rich, very dark fruit oriented, so it tastes more like plum and dark cherry, sweet cherry, blackberry. That is the variety itself, so Zinfandel. Now, an Old Vine Zen tends to possibly produce different chemical components than a young vine, but I wouldn't say that's the direct relation there. I think a lot of it is they use that variety and then they tailor it to the winemaking process and they adjust a few things. But yeah, an Old Vine Zen is gonna be fruit forward, soft tannin, not harsh tannin like a Cabernet from Napa would be initially at least. Not as puckeringly dry, and it's gonna have those fruity aromas in that body there. Usually also high alcohol, so it's weighted, it's more viscous tasting. Yeah, it's complicated, but that kind of gives you an idea like what this mouthfeel is. It's mainly alcohol, acid, sugar, and then you've got tannins too, right? Those compounds that make your mouth dry out. Yeah, great question.
I was gonna tell you something that last year when we did our Miss Blanc, we measured the pH, the bricks on August 28th as between 16 and 17.
Yes.
And then on about 4 days later, we measured it again, and it was 7.
Yeah.
So
So part of the
that's what
problem.
happened to it.
So this is interesting. So this is one of the challenges of growing grapes and making your own wine is when you go out to the vineyard and you measure sugar so you know the ideal time to harvest, you know, you're taking a couple berries probably, and you're not getting the most representative sample. Well, once you harvest everything, including the berries that your brain did not want to pick, the more green ones, we typically, when we're picking fruit, we go for the nicest looking berries. Sometimes we go, holy smokes, we were getting high sugar levels, but when we crush everything, make wine out of it, it can be lower. So if we get to that point, typically you're not gonna see, you won't see sugar drop, ever.
Even after it started fermenting?
Nope. Oh, after fermentation,
Because that's
yes.
what I was trying to say.
Oh,
Ours
okay.
was
I thought
3
you meant
days after
Oh,
fermentation
yes,
started.
yes. So that shows you the yeast are eating the sugar, and that's why the level's going down. But the sugar level will typically, unless we get a big rain, will typically not ever decrease once it starts to ripen, the fruit. It'll just keep increasing, then it'll get to a high point and stay stable.
Okay.
But yeah, what you're saying
Because
is.
we were worried that might be happening on the vine too,
Yeah.
that the sugar was dropping, but it does not. It will
No,
achieve its maximum.
it'll go,
stay
and then
there.
as it starts to raise and it concentrates, and the sugar can go even higher. So, and the only time sugar will decrease is if we get a heavy rain and the vine's pumping a lot of water into the fruit, and you get dilution, but that will balance out eventually. It'll come back up.
And we don't have to worry about leaving a lot of leaf on the vine once the fruit has, because that was the other thing we were concerned about, whether the vine was putting energy in the leaves as opposed
Yes.
to the grapes. Should
Yeah.
we start taking more leaves off of
Yes,
our
if you
vine?
want to help, you can do a little more hedging, just to maintain the vines once there's no kids on the vine. When there's no children sucking the life out of that mother vine, she's gonna take a spa day, she's happy. One of the great things about Texas is we have a lot of challenges growing grapes and other fruits. But one of the nice things we have going for us is we typically harvest most of our fruit by August, whether it's peaches or grapes or whatever, blueberries, blackberries. But we still have September, October, and most of November till our first killing frost or freeze that drops all the leaves. And so when you've got no fruit, no children taking all the energy from mama, then she's able to invest, if she has green leaves still, which she should, all that energy she makes for herself, like she's taking a spa day.
Okay.
It's her self-care.
So leave some-
And so when we look at this vineyard or the peaches or the apples, and after we harvest, the last thing we want to do is ignore that mother plant, because we need to help her build her roots. Also, roots are growing very actively in the fall because it's not hot as heck, or it's still hot, but it's not like it is right now. So we want to encourage that sugar production through photosynthesis to build the roots, store up energy. A plant that has more sugar in its wood that she stores is going to be much less likely to be injured from freezing temperatures in the winter. Sugar acts as an antifreeze. And then next year, when we have bud break, that mother vine has lots of sugar stored up, and she'll be able to blow and go.
So we want to leave the leaves on then, is what
You
you're
want
saying,
it, well,
leave
so you want to have a
photosynthesis.
balance. So you don't want overly vigorous canopies, because without kids, that mother vine's going to want to put out even more leaves. And when you get too many leaves, you get a dense canopy, more disease, and you end up losing leaves long term. So the quick answer is, when we harvest this fruit, do a little trimming just to kind of keep things cleaned up, get good sunlight and airflow, but don't strip, the vines of all the leaves. We want those leaves, but we don't want too many.
Not too many. Okay,
Great
perfect.
question. Okay, so how much sugar, we added all the sugar to how many? When do we run out?
We just did 2, these 2.
Okay.
And she's gone to buy some more.
Okay, so we've got 2 for now. Okay, so now this could backfire on me, but let's measure the sugar now and see if it's gone up, okay? It may not, it takes some time for it to kind of homogenize, but let's just see here. So let's take this and see what we get. Ho, 21%, right on the money. Y'all can see that if you want, okay? Then we did it. So now we have a good sugar content. So now we have to prepare for the main event. We're gonna pitch our yeast, okay? One other thing before we do that, I just remembered. we need to do one more thing, okay, before we get our yeast ready. Now, we're dealing with muscadines. Y'all saw how when we were crushing and destemming outside, that essentially the pulp was real thick and gelatinous. We didn't get a ton of juice. I mean, we have good juice, but we need to break down all that gelatinous pulp and extract all that juice as much as we can. And so we need to add an enzyme called pectic enzyme. Some of y'all may be familiar with this if you make certain products with your fruit. And what this is gonna do is it's an enzyme, it's a natural enzyme, and it's a protein, and it's gonna break down the pulp and help release all the juice, right? Which is important because that's what's gonna make our wine. And so we add half a teaspoon per gallon, okay? So we're gonna add about 2.5 teaspoons per bat. No. Yeah.
Yeah, 2.5.
Told you, I'm an Aggie. The math isn't coming naturally to me.
What is that again?
So
Half a
it's a half a
teaspoon per
teaspoon per
gallon.
gallon. We got 5.
So 2.5.
This is pectic enzyme. And so this is what's gonna help break down our thick pulp to give us the most juice we can get, okay? You may not have to add this. We added a little bit to our Miss Blanc in Lake Emerald last year, but this is absolutely critical for muscadines. Absolutely critical. And all it is it's just gonna help break down that juice so the yeast can get to that and ferment the sugar out, okay? So it's half a teaspoon per gallon, so 2.5 teaspoons. So we need to measure that out. And so if we can get, okay, we've got a teaspoon here.
I was gonna say we don't have to do this.
I'm gonna try to get this without burning myself. And I'll let someone dose this out. We'll just give it an estimate here. So we'll guesstimate. A little extra, a little less is not gonna be a problem. This is very safe. It's just a natural enzyme. So we're gonna add that. That's gonna help break everything down. Okay, so if someone wants to come up, you can help me dose out the rest of these to each one, and we'll stir it
Put
up.
that in, do you need to put that in before or after the
About
sugar?
2 of those. About two of those.
Starting here.
Uh-huh.
Yes, he's done the first one.
Okay. And we'll stir that up.
Do I need my gloves?
Hmm?
Do I need my gloves?
No, yeah, this is fine. Okay, now, the next step is going to be making our yeast solution. Okay, so anyone make bread, you know kind of how this goes. We're gonna take our yeast, this one here, the name is EC1118, and it's a great yeast for muscadines and other wines. So it's a general purpose wine yeast. The instructions are on the back, but essentially we're gonna get some hot water. Okay, these are dehydrated, so it's yeast that's been dried and dehydrated. So we need to activate them, wake them up, saturate them. And so we're gonna add about 2 ounces of water to this one packet. And this one packet usually does about 5 gallons of finished wine. Let's see here, up to five and 10 gallons. Where's Sherry? How many do we have of these? Huh? Pack of 10? Okay, can we get 3 more? It's better to be safe than sorry, so we'll do 1 per pail, okay? And so we need to hydrate this yeast. And so we're gonna take our measuring cup and we're gonna get some hot water going. It needs to be, the temperature range is very specific. We don't wanna cook our little yeast. 95 to 98.6 degrees, okay? So we'll let the water warm up, and then we need our measuring cup.
Jen has it.
Yeah,
Okay. Oh, yeah, okay.
yeah. He's working on the sugar.
Okay, we'll let that go. One other thing, we're gonna measure one other thing, and then we'll get our yeast ready, we'll pitch it, and we'll be done for today. So we're almost there. Perfect, thank you. So we need about a 1/4 cup for every yeast packet, and I'm just gonna go ahead and make about a cup. And I'm gonna add one other thing, but that'll give us enough to make 5 packs of yeast, one for each pail. Okay. Now, one other thing I need is if we have a thermometer, I think we have, no, we may have one over here. Scientific method of the finger test to see how hot it is. Okay. And we added pectin enzymes to all these guys. Great job. Okay. So that's going. So we added our pectic enzyme. We're going to take one more measurement before we pitch our yeast. But I'm going to go ahead because it takes about 15-20 minutes to get our yeast ready. Okay. So this is just like very similar to making bread yeast. Rehydrating that. I don't see it. And that's okay. That's a hydrometer. So we'll do it. Yeah, that should be good. It's warm, but it's not scalding. So I'm gonna take a. Oh, perfect. Great job. Yeah, just give it a quick dip. Okay, we'll stick it in here. Nice. Good job. We can just rest it more. All right, let's give that a minute to go. Ooh, it's going up. It's 100. Is that 100? We need to let that cool just a little bit. And the easiest way to do that, instead of waiting like a bunch of morons, we can add a little cool water to it. I learned that. I was like, why didn't I think of that? When I was at college at A&M, you make this up, you go, oh, it's 110 degrees. We gotta let that get down to 98 or so. We just sit there and wait 30 minutes. It's like, what are we doing? So we can bring this down. This one's way up there. It's 105. So we'll cool it down. We do not want it hotter than the recommended range, or our yeast will not do well. They'll be burned. So, okay, it's actually pretty hot. Okay. All right, it's going down. Yes. Say that again? Yes. So we'll get to that in a sec. Good question. All right, so this is at about 96, 97, which is great. All right, now before I add my yeast, I'm gonna do a couple things. In order for our yeast to be really happy, we're gonna give them a little bit like a vitamin. This is called yeast nutrient. Yeast needs sugar, but they also need things like nitrogen and some other things. So we're gonna add about a teaspoon here. So this is yeast nutrient. You can add, this is just gonna help our yeast not have a good strong fermentation and not become stressed. Okay, so I'm gonna add a little bit of that. Yeah, it looks like fish food.
So our grapes don't become stressed?
Yeah, so we don't want the yeast
That's
to be
what the
stressed.
wine is for after we finish.
That's right.
Good point.
That's right. I like
But we
that.
have to wait for it.
Okay, so we don't need this. So we've got yeast nutrient, and then we have one other yeast additive, and it is it's pectic enzyme. So the yeast, this is specifically for red wine, and in particular Muscadine. There are many different yeasts. Some yeasts are great for dry white wine, some are great for mead, some are great for fruit-based wines, some are great for red wines, sweet red wine, dry, there's thousands. Yeah, it's just like, the options of women's shoes at the store or whatever, it's like, there's a yeast for anything. So you go online, and this is one of literally 2,000 types of yeast you can buy. Okay, and so this is general yeast that's very good, and it's gonna be excellent for our yeast here, our must of Muscadine, and this one should help us, especially, well, the cool thing about yeast is, here's something I forgot to say. This is interesting. When you drink wine and you notice, we talked about mouthfeel a little bit, but what about flavor and smell? Most of the things that we perceive in the wine are actually not taste. That's what you've all learned in school. Saltiness, sweet, tart or acidic, and umami, right? Those are the main tastes that our taste buds are picking up in our mouth. But when we drink wine, we get that, right? Sweetness, maybe some tartness, but a lot of the fun with wine is not the taste, it's the aroma, the smell, right? When you smell that wine and you go, oh my gosh, that smells like apples or pears or blackberries or dark cherry or leather or wood or vanilla, whatever it is, right? That's not because the winery added that artificial smell. The cool thing is you go out to this vineyard and you eat grapes and they taste like grapes, right? And sometimes they have some unique smells to them, like muscadine, so we can smell that real fruity bouquet of unique muscadine smell. The cool thing is that there are thousands of chemical compounds in this must right now that is not volatile and it's not unlocked for us to smell. And the cool thing is as yeasts convert sugar, there are also a lot of chemistry going on, and there are lots of compounds being unlocked, lots of compounds in here being chemically changed. And so all those smells like apples and pears and blackberries, depending on whatever one we're talking about, most of those aromas are actually volatilized into an aerosol essentially that we perceive thanks to yeast. So the yeast does more than just produces alcohol and carbon dioxide. It helps produce and unlock a lot of those unique smells to the wine that you would never get making jelly or juice. You have yeast here that unlocks that for us. So a lot of yeast, not only, one of the reasons why they're best suited for certain types of wine is because they can determine the aroma profile. For example, we made Miss Blanc last year. Now, Miss Blanc has muscat in its parentage, so the smells are very similar to like Moscato, because that has muscat in it. So that real fruity kind of even some floral notes to it. Well, some yeast can heighten that floral, fruity smell. Some can convert to different things. Some can convert to more tropical notes. So the cool thing is the different strain of yeast can have a huge impact on the aroma profile of a wine. You could take this, I could literally take one of these pails, it's all the same grapes, and I could add a different yeast to each one, and the flavor profiles will be different. Maybe not big, hugely different, but they will be different, just based on the yeast type. But anyways, this is a great general yeast. And the nice thing about yeast is they're usually pretty cheap, so not very expensive. Okay, so we added yeast nutrient. I think that's it. There was one other thing I wanted to, okay, there's tartaric acid. I'll look at that later, but we're gonna go ahead and pitch this, okay? Y'all can come up, if I can get some help. I need 4 people. Come on up. And you can open this up and pitch it into the, no, you don't have to wash your hands. Good question. Because we're not touching anything, it's all in the tank. Yes. All in the same. We're gonna make enough yeast, because we're using the same yeast for everything, enough for all 5 pails at once.
Okay, when you're done pitching.
Is that enough water?
So I added a little bit of yeast nutrient to my solution here to get the yeast going. I'm also going to help them by giving just a little bit of our must, so they have some sugar, and that's really gonna help them get going, even in just about 10 minutes, right? So that's gonna help, right? So put a little bit in there, and I'm also gonna add some yeast nutrient to the must, so someone can help me dose that out, so that there's enough vitamins, essentially nutrients, in this must for our yeast to be happy.
How much yeast nutrient are you?
So we're gonna add, it says here, 1 teaspoon per gallon, so 5 teaspoons per pail. Okay, so we've added that. Let's go ahead and stir this yeast up just a little bit, and we're gonna let it set, and hopefully it's gonna start foaming and bubbling like your bread yeast would. Yes, should be enough. Yeah, we only need about 2 ounces per packet, so this is a cup. Okay, get this yeast hydrated. Okay, we're gonna set it for about 10 minutes. Cross our fingers, say a prayer, because there's no point, guys, there's no point in spending all this time and money and pitching yeast that did not take. Sometimes yeast only let you refrigerate this, so if you buy yeast and you're gonna make wine later, put it in the refrigerator, sometimes even the freezer, and it's only good for up to a year. So if it's older than that, you could do everything right, but if the yeast don't wake up, then it's not gonna make wine, right? So we gotta make sure we use good yeast. Yeah, you just rinse it off. Okay, so we've added that. Now while we're waiting with our yeast, the last thing we're gonna do is we are going to measure the specific gravity. And this is the most important measurement we can take once we start fermenting our wine. So for those of you that don't know, this is a hydrometer. This is a measuring device. It can measure multiple things, but today we're going to measure the specific gravity. Now that may be foreign to you, but specific gravity is simply the viscosity of the wine or the juice. And this juice has lots of sugar in it, right? And what is heavier, sugar water or plain water or water with alcohol in it? Well, sugar water. It's much more dense. And so we'll take a reading, and it's going to be on this scale, and it's going to be a higher number, okay? And as the yeast eats the sugar and releases alcohol, the density of this juice is going to become much lighter. And when I put this hydrometer in it, the number will be lower. So we're going to start off with a high number, and over time it's going to, because it's lighter, it's going to go down because it's buoyant, so it goes up, but the number is going to be lower. And this is going to tell us when fermentation is done. Okay, when the yeast have done their job appropriately, this is going to tell us when the wine is dry. Okay, and so we did this last year. We're going to record the starting number, and then in the next few days, the yeast is going to eat the sugar, the solution is going to become much less dense. We can see it on the scale here when we measure, and that's going to give us an idea of, number one, when we're done, but also how the fermentation is going. Say that again? Oh, yeah, I have another bag. Use this here. Now this is kind of clumpy, so you might have to, yeah. You might have to pour this out in a pail or a little
something and crush it.
Yeah. Okay. So, where was I going with that? Oh, yeah, so we need to measure that. So, we don't just throw this hydrometer in the must because there's a bunch of stuff in it. So, we need to take the juice, set that here. We're going to use this little siphon to take out our liquid, and we're going to put it in this graduated cylinder, essentially. This one's not graduated, but it's a cylinder. And then we're going to measure it. So we need to have a starting measurement. So if you forget this, you're in big trouble because you don't know your starting density of this juice. So I'm going to go in here and see if I can get some of this. That's not going to give me much because this has a bunch of solids in it. So let me just go ahead and get a spoon. Oh, here. So when I take a measurement, I want to get as much of the juice, as much as the skins and seeds out of here. I don't want a lot of that in here. Okay, this is going to take a minute. We're gonna not waste our time with that. We're gonna go ahead and do this. Okay, so this is probably the most important reading we can have, or we can take, and it's the specific gravity with our hydrometer. So I'm gonna make sure everyone can see this when I put this in, but I'm gonna get all the berries out because that's gonna affect how where this hydrometer rests. And if we have these, it's gonna give us a false reading. So I'm gonna try to remove as much of this as possible. Okay. A few seeds are okay. All right, so this is our juice. There's some pulp in there, we get that out too. Okay. So I take my hydrometer and I put it in like this. All right, and I give it a good spin. Now, this is really important as we start getting carbon dioxide and bubbles. If we start having bubbles inside this liquid, if we don't spin it and try to break those bubbles off of the little reader here, then it's gonna stick to it and it'll give us a false reading. All right, we don't have any bubbles right now, but we wanna give it a good spin, and then it's gonna kind of bob up and down like a fishing bobber. And we wanna record, there's a bunch of numbers on here, but there's one section that starts at 1 at the top and then 1.1 at the bottom, okay? And we wanna start about 1.1, gives us a good idea or so. Let's see here. Okay. Let me see where this goes, okay. So it's very dense. Okay. It's going to be close to 1.1. It's actually right at about 1.09. So if someone wants to record that, our starting specific gravity is 1.09. Okay, and as we consume that sugar, we go down, let's see, it should lift up like this. So actually we're gonna go, no, it'll go down, yeah. So, yes, because it's heavier. So I said that, I misspoke earlier, sorry. So it'll actually go down, but the number is also gonna go down. But it's going up on this scale, so don't worry about that. We start at 1 point.
Just read what it says.
I haven't done this in a year, so I'm like, wait, now this scale always gets me every year, because it's like.
The specific gravity is supposed to go up as the wine ferments?
It's going up on the scale, but it's going down in the number. All right, so we start at 1.09, and then in an hour it'll be at 1.08, and then in an hour it'll be at 1.07, 1.05, 4, 3, 2, and once we get to 1, then we're dry. There's no more sugar left. We have maximum alcohol. The yeast are done. We can go ahead and we have real wine. Okay, it doesn't seem like much. You're like, what the heck? We're going from 1.1 to 1, but that's a huge difference.
And how long does it normally take?
So, when we talk about fermentation, it depends. If we have a red wine and we keep this in a 70 degree, 80 degree room, we're looking at about 3 days, maybe to 7 days for some, but muscadines are really fast. And with muscadines, we don't need a lot of skin contact. So we're looking, I plan on coming back out Friday and we can press this off, but we're gonna have to just keep an eye on it because we may have to do another day if we are getting sluggish fermentation. So Sherry is gonna make sure that this wine, she's gonna take hydrometer readings over the next couple days. You'll see bubbling going on, so we know fermentation is active, but the question is, when do we know when we're done? And we have to use this tool right here, okay? And so y'all can come up if you want and take a look and see where that kind of is resting. But essentially, we need to get up to 1, which is really down to 1, but the scale is up to 1, all right?
I think this was the point last year where we thought it was gonna take a week, and then Sherry and I came out 2 days later, and
Yeah.
it was already at.
Yeah, so y'all, so that fermentation, Sherry called me, she's like, I think I'm measuring this wrong. I'm already at 1, and that was that quick. And so
But I
it
think we also decided we didn't add enough sugar.
Yes, we didn't know exactly how much to add.
We miscalculated the amount of sugar to put
Yes.
in, and so our alcohol.
Yes, it was very light, yeah.
Right, but where are
So-
you reading?
Okay, so you see this scale? See the 1? It's that scale. So when you read this, it's not as intuitive. There's 1.1, so it's right at about this 90 here, which means it's 1.09. See that?
So it's
And
gonna
when
sink.
It's got, the hydrometer's gonna sink.
Because it's less dense.
It's less dense
As-
because the sugar's gone.
Exactly.
So the thermometer goes down, but as it goes.
So as it
down,
goes down, this'll go to 1.
Yes,
Yes.
because it's becoming less dense. And that tells us
Density becomes
that the
less.
sugar's being consumed and we're getting alcohol production, which is
Right.
what we want, okay? So that's great.
Make sure we were reading. Last year, we looked all at that, which one of these numbers are supposed to
So,
interest?
and Sherry may, so we're gonna, most likely, we'll meet here Friday because most likely this will be fermented. Sherry's gonna do a last minute call and let me know. But we have Friday scheduled. And what we're gonna do is take our official wine and we're gonna press it off and then let it age. And then y'all can bottle it later.
Okay, question. Do we not have to, rack it?
Yes, so you'll be doing that as we
Okay.
age
But
it.
we're gonna, once we do, we're gonna put it in the carboy on Friday.
Yes.
So we'll
Yes.
squish it
Yep.
and move it into
And
the.
carboy and let it
carboy's
settle.
like a clear glass or plastic container with a lid.
This was red wine, so I don't know if it's
Sit in
safe.
there
Muscadine. The first rack,
for a few weeks.
when the juice is coming in, you wanna leave it up so the air actually,
Yeah,
which was not the case with the white wine.
yeah.
Is that
Well,
the-
we want oxygen now.
Right.
But when we press this off, we don't want, if it's wine, we don't want oxygen.
Okay, not even,
So,
okay.
yeah, so we don't want any oxygen once we press that off because it's wine now. The oxygen helps with the yeast, but when we're done, so Friday, if this is wine, which it most likely will be, we'll press it off the skin and we will put them into carboys, the juice, the wine, and we want no oxygen.
And so, okay, gotcha.
Yes,
See, that was the opposite of what I was.
yes. So so when it's in the carboy, we want no oxygen. So we're gonna sparge it and we'll also take that little wand with the drill and release as much CO2 as possible that's inside the wine itself. And I'll bring my drill, so, but you've got the little wand there. Yeah, so we'll go over that. Okay. All right, guys, take a look at this. Look at our yeast. It's working. So it's all bubbly, it's doubled in size and that foam. So we did a good job there.
Probably need to stir that up.
Yeah. So if someone wants to, a couple of y'all want to come, I'll let y'all what we call pitch the yeast. This is the ceremonial pitching to make wine. Right now, this is just must.
I pitched some yeast.
Okay, yeah, pitch some yeast. Yeah.
I love
Okay.
that. I'm not gonna pitch any woo.
Yeah, no woo, but yeast. Yes. Okay.
That's after the wine.
All right. So what we're gonna do is, if you can pour about 2 ounces. You know, so yeah, maybe like a shot glass or something into.
Set it down and I'll
Okay, yeah, get the handle here. In just kind of around the top there, about 2 ounces.
2 ounces, that's a shot's worth.
Mm-hmm. So this is it. Very good.
Kinda looks like chai tea or something.
Keep going. Perfect. That's good. All right, that's all it took. And so now we can stir it up, get that yeast all throughout, and it's gonna start fermenting, and probably in about an hour or so, we're gonna see bubbles just starting to form. And that'll be our initial, yes ma'am, please. Okay, so whoever wants to pitch more yeast, we need about 2 ounces in each one. Very good. So this is the beginning of wine, right here. Now, as we're making wine, I shouldn't say as we are, as the yeast is working hard, okay, then you can just put that in the sink, thank you. And if y'all want to help me stir this up, yeah, y'all want to give this a good stir.
I'll stir one.
As the yeast is eating sugar and releasing ethanol and carbon dioxide, we want to make sure when we store these fermentation buckets or bins, we keep the lids on them but not tight. If we do, what's going to happen? And then Dr. Daniels isn't going to be happy because they're sticky all over the floor. And these ceilings are as clean as they're ever going to be. We don't want to add any color to the ceiling. Okay, we're going to keep this place nice and clean. So we're going to just loosely set the lid on here. Okay, once we stir this up. And we're gonna sit them in the room there at room temperature. And again, hopefully in about 2 days, the yeast will have consumed all the sugar. We now have wine, and we need to press off all the skins and seeds and bits of pulp that's left, and we'll put them into glass carboys or jugs. And then our wine is going to start settling, all the sediment, the dead yeast cells, any proteins and precipitate will sink to the bottom, and we will clarify that up. We'll sterile filter or close to sterile filter it to get any more remaining proteins out, and then we'll be able to bottle. So that's kind of the process there. But next time, we're gonna be keeping an eye on this and actually start pressing this off with a big press. I have a big one too that I got working this time, so that'll make it real fast.
And we put extra yeast in this one too, right?
What else was I gonna say about that? I'm trying to think. I think that was the, okay. Jerry, you listening? Okay, in the meantime, so we're gonna put the lids loosely on here, set them in, fermentation's gonna be happening. Now, this is very different than when we make white wine from our green grapes out in the vineyard here. We're gonna take this tool right here, and this is like the heaviest duty potato masher I've ever seen. But this is what we use in the winery too. Now what's happening is, in this slurry, okay, we have carbon dioxide being made, and the bubbles are rising to the top, and they're bringing the skins to the top. The skins are floating to the top because they're light. Now, we want the goodies in the skin. And how are we gonna get goodies out of the skin if all the skins are at the top, not in liquid? So twice a day, you have to punch, we call this punch down. And this is what they do in every winery when they make red wine, is you will take that and you will just maybe 4 or 5 strokes, push those skins back down to the bottom. And in a couple hours, they'll float back up. But then you push them down. So in the morning and evening, if possible, at least once a day, all right, we need to punch this down.
So like this evening or late afternoon?
Yeah, so this evening and then morning and evening if possible. And hopefully it's just gonna be for the next, what's today, Wednesday? So Friday, right? So it's hopefully won't last long. You won't have to do it much. That's gonna help with our extraction, which is what we want, okay? So that's another very unique part to making red wine. So we've got our punch down, we've added everything. Oh, I was gonna say, this wine is going to be best made into a lightly sweet wine, an off-dry, just very slightly semi-sweet. We don't have to make a super sweet wine, but Muscadine wine tends not to be as nice when it's fully dry. It's a little harsher. So we're probably gonna add a little bit more sugar after fermentation to get the sugar, the taste to where we want it. We're not gonna add a lot, but probably just a little bit to give it a little bit of sweetness, because all that sugar we just added, it won't be sugar in 2 or 3 days. It's gonna be alcohol. So we will not have sugar in here. So if we wanna have a little bit of a sweeter wine, then we'll have to add a little bit more in. Okay.
But
All right.
when we put that extra sugar, we do it after it's been in the carboys for a while, and when we
No, so, well, you can, but typically, I mean, we're gonna know right away when we press.
Alright.
So I would go ahead and put it in the carboy, stir it up, and then everything will start settling and all the sediment and stuff from the yeast and that kind of thing. So we'll do it that day. We'll add sugar if we need to. We'll get to taste it. Yes, sir.
What is causing the fermentation to stop?
Good question. The fermentation stops when there is no more food for the yeast, right? So when the sugar runs out, there's 2 things actually. When the sugar runs out, the yeast doesn't have food and they start to die. But also, as the alcohol content increases, it will stress out and then it can kill some of the yeast, but it won't kill all. Okay, so the main reason why fermentation will stop is because there's just no more sugar.
So when you hit that 1.0
Yep.
mark.
No sugar. That means there's no sugar left.
Therefore, there's no yeast, so
Yep.
you can add sugar and it's not gonna start the fermentation.
No, that's a good question. So that's the key. When it hits 1, there's no more sugar, but that doesn't mean all the yeast are dead.
Okay.
So if I add more sugar, that's how we believe champagne was invented, is that fermentation stopped, but the yeast didn't die, and there was still a little bit of residual sugar left in the bottle. They put a cork on it, and then there was a little bit of fermentation later on, and it popped the cork, and then it was sparkling, right? So if we add sugar after we press in our carboys, there's still gonna be some yeast that are survive, and they're gonna re-ferment. So what we have to do is add sugar, and then there's another product we can add called potassium sorbate, which is a preservative, and it will stop any remaining yeast from fermenting that new sugar, right? So that's a great question. There are other ways to arrest that, but yeah, that's the main way we'll use it, is ferment dry. If we add sugar, which you don't have to, like Miss Blanc, we didn't add any, I don't think, after fermentation. So it was very dry. We could have added a little bit, even though it wouldn't have tasted sweet, it'd be a little better rounded, I'd say. That was the only thing I would have done differently. No big deal. But this, because it's muscadine, we'll want a little sweetness. That's gonna really help showcase those fruity aromas and give it kind of some more body to it. But it's not gonna be like, you know, drinking, I don't know, some sort of syrup. You know, we don't want that. So we just wanted a little bit of sugar if we need it. Most likely we will, okay? So that's it, guys. So we've pitched our yeast. Now we can put a lid on it, okay? And we can set these wherever Sherry wants them. I'm assuming in the...
We just rolled the table.
Okay.
So we might have to use 2 tables, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah. I can zigzag these on here and get all 5 on one table.
Because we don't want that to mold up or anything, and it's gonna be a pain to clean later. So we'll do a quick clean on that. Guys, that's pretty much it. So it took a while, but that was just because we were processing, but it doesn't take that long. So this is the actual fermentation is gonna start. And so Sherry, we have Friday blocked off. I would recommend, I don't know what the schedule is, but because it's Wednesday, that'll give us most of today, all of tomorrow. I would recommend we, if possible, can we meet at lunchtime maybe, or afternoon, or what's the building like, or what's your schedule?
It was down for noon. It was down for noon.
Oh, it was? Oh, good. Oh.
It's
So-
9:30, but we could, I guess we could